You know that look that leaves the room before the person does. They are still facing you, still listening, but suddenly their eyes are somewhere else. You may have noticed it during dinner, during texting silence, during apologies that sounded almost right. Nothing obvious happened, yet something inside you instantly whispered that the moment had changed. Most people call it distraction, tiredness, stress, or say you are simply overthinking again. But that distant gaze is often not random, and your body usually catches it first. It can be the exact second someone stops sharing the same emotional space with you. And once you see why, a lot of confusing moments start making painful sense. Because eyes do not just look at people, they reveal where the mind retreats under pressure. That is the part almost nobody explains when words and presence suddenly stop matching. You've probably felt this before without finding language precise enough to trust yourself. Someone says they are fine, yet their eyes pull away like they touch something hot. Someone smiles at your joke, but their attention seems to vanish behind the smile. Someone agrees with you immediately, and somehow that quick agreement feels less comforting than resistance. The strange part is not the movement itself, it is the mismatch around it. The face stays social, the voice stays smooth, but the eyes stop emotionally cooperating. That is usually where the truth starts leaking through the performance people still hope will hold. Not because everyone is hiding something dramatic, but because inner conflict needs somewhere to escape. And the eyes often carry the first visible sign that feeling and behavior have split. So when their gaze turns distant, the real question is not where they looked. The real question is, what made them leave the moment before their body could follow? One of the clearest examples happens in ordinary conversation right after something unexpectedly personal lands. You mention commitment, honesty, money, jealousy, attraction, or a memory they were not prepared for. For 1 second they hold eye contact, then their eyes slide away too fast. Not thoughtfully, not casually, but like their nervous system is trying to create breathing room. That small shift can signal emotional overload, not because your words were wrong or aggressive. Sometimes what you said simply touched a place they were actively trying to manage. People look away when they need distance from information that activates shame, fear, or longing. Not always, but often enough that your instincts notice before your logic catches up. That is why the moment can feel heavier than the sentence itself should have felt. You are not only hearing their response, you are sensing their internal reorganization in real time. And that inner reorganization is often more honest than whatever answer arrives next. Another familiar moment is when someone smiles warmly, yet the warmth never reaches their eyes. You might have seen this after giving a compliment, sharing good news, or entering a room. Their mouth responds correctly, but their gaze hardens, drops, or briefly loses emotional focus. That does not automatically mean envy, dislike, or rejection, and certainty is usually a mistake. But it often suggests mixed feeling where one part wants connection while another part resists. Maybe they feel threatened, maybe insecure, maybe attracted, maybe suddenly aware of comparison. The important thing is not to force one dramatic explanation onto every subtle reaction. The important thing is noticing when expression and eye behavior stop telling the same story. Because that is where emotional mismatch becomes visible enough for you to actually observe. A third situation feels even stranger because it looks positive on the surface. A friend agrees with you too quickly, almost generously, with no friction at all. Their words say yes, absolutely, of course, whatever works, I am fine with that. But their eyes go distant for a beat, like something went offline behind them. That can happen when someone is complying faster than they are actually processing. They might be avoiding conflict, hiding disappointment, or trying to stay likable despite resistance. What looks easy in the moment can become resentment later because the real response never surfaced. And often the distant gaze appears exactly where the unsaid no quietly enters the room. That is why some conversations feel resolved, yet leave behind a tension you cannot explain. You can feel agreement happen socially while disagreement stayed alive emotionally underneath it. This is where people get misled by simple advice about eye contact. They are told direct eyes mean honesty, broken eye contact means lying, and everything feels measurable. Real human behavior is rarely that clean, especially when emotions are layered and socially managed. A person can hold strong eye contact while performing confidence they do not actually feel. Another can look away because they are protecting a vulnerable truth, not hiding deception. What matters more is the pattern around the gaze, not the gaze alone. Timing matters, facial tension matters, pauses matter, and mismatch always matters more than folklore. That is why one glance can feel harmless, while another glance quietly changes everything. Your mind notices movement, but your nervous system notices meaning through context and sequence. And sequence is where subtle behavior becomes psychologically rich instead of randomly mysterious. If their eyes turn distant before they answer, that usually matters more than after. If the distance appears right after praise, that means something different than after criticism. If the gaze leaves while their smile remains, you are watching two emotional tracks diverge. That divergence is often the clue people miss because the words still sound acceptable. But acceptable words do not always mean truly emotionally aligned words underneath. Sometimes the most revealing moment is a tiny pause before a very polished answer. You ask something simple, and the delay is barely 1 second longer than normal. Then the response comes back neat, controlled, and maybe even unusually reasonable. Yet their eyes already told you the answer had to be assembled, not simply expressed. That does not prove manipulation, but it can reveal editing under emotional pressure. People edit when the honest reaction feels unsafe, embarrassing, needy, or too revealing. And the distant gaze can be the brief corridor between impulse and socially acceptable language. Once you understand that corridor, a lot of interactions stop feeling confusingly hollow. You start noticing how often emotional truth appears first as hesitation, not declaration. That matters in attraction too, because distance does not always mean disinterest. Sometimes someone looks away because your presence creates more intensity than they can smoothly regulate. They become more formal, more careful, more detached, exactly because they feel too much. You may have seen this when chemistry is obvious, but eye contact becomes oddly unstable. The eyes lock, then break, then return with a little too much caution. That pattern can carry tension, self-consciousness, fear of exposure, or emotional inexperience. Again, not certainty, but a clue that feeling is exceeding the person's current comfort. People often imagine emotions appear as clear signals, but they usually leak through contradictions. A warm voice with a cold face, a confident statement with hesitant eyes. A casual answer with delayed breathing, a smile that arrives half a second late. These are not dramatic tells borrowed from some unrealistic television detective scene. They are small signs that someone is managing more than they are openly expressing. And once you respect those signs, your social awareness becomes much more accurate. So what should you actually notice next time their gaze turns distant around you? First, notice timing, because timing tells you what emotional trigger came immediately before the shift. Did their eyes move after your compliment, your boundary, your joke, or your direct question? The meaning often lives less in the movement than in what activated it. A distant gaze after praise may signal discomfort with being seen or believed. A distant gaze after closeness may signal fear of intimacy more than lack of care. A distant gaze after a simple request may signal pressure, resentment, or silent self-erasure. When you track the exact moment, the behavior stops feeling vague and starts becoming readable. Second, notice direction not in a technical way, but in an emotional one. Some people look down when shame rises, sideways when they are checking for escape. Some look past you when dissociation begins, like attention has unplugged from the room. Some hold your gaze too long because breaking it would expose insecurity too clearly. The point is not decoding everyone mechanically like a human lie detector. The point is learning each pattern as part of a larger emotional map. Direction only matters when it repeats with the same kind of internal tension. That repetition is what turns a single moment into a meaningful pattern. Third, notice the distance between the words and the rest of the face. If someone says something warm while their eyes go flat, trust the mismatch. If someone says yes while their jaw tightens slightly, trust the mismatch. If someone laughs while their expression drains right after, trust the mismatch. Not as proof, not as accusation, but as a clue requiring patience. The body often tells you where a person's emotional truth became too complicated to hide smoothly. That is valuable because it helps you respond with awareness instead of fantasy. Fantasy is what fills the gap when you ignore subtle signals and overbelieve polished words. Awareness is what lets you stay kind without becoming emotionally blind at times. And that distinction can change friendships, dating, family tension, and even workplace trust. Because the real damage in human connection is not always open conflict. Often it is prolonged misreading where everyone stays polite while truth quietly disappears. A distant gaze can be the first quiet sign of that disappearance. Not the whole story, but often the first loose thread worth noticing. If you keep pulling carefully, you often find fear underneath, not cruelty. You find longing underneath distance, shame underneath defensiveness, and hesitation underneath fake ease. That is why becoming more observant should never make you colder inside. It should make you gentler because most people are leaking conflict, not plotting against you. They are trying to stay acceptable while feeling something messier than their role allows. And their eyes briefly reveal the hidden emotional cost of doing that. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is notice without immediately confronting. Give the moment room, stay present, and see whether the pattern returns. One glance can mislead you, but repeated mismatches usually deserve your attention, especially when your body keeps reacting before your mind can explain why. That reaction is not always anxiety, and it is not always imagination. Very often it is social perception working faster than your conscious language. You are reading tiny changes in energy, timing, and expression before you can verbalize them. That is why some interactions feel off, even when nothing obviously wrong was said. Your nervous system is catching the emotional edit happening in real time. And the distant gaze is one of the clearest places that edit becomes visible. So the next time someone seems present, but their eyes quietly leave the moment, pause. Ask yourself what happened right before it, what did not match, and what felt edited. You do not need to become deeply suspicious of everyone around you. You just need to become honest about the signals you were trained to dismiss. Because people reveal themselves most clearly in the split second before composure fully returns. And once you learn to see that, ordinary interactions stop being ordinary. They become full of clues about fear, desire, discomfort, and the hidden work of self-protection. If a moment like this has stayed in your mind, share it below. And if Novi Mind helps you notice what most people miss, subscribe and stay close. In the next video, we are getting into the smile that appears exactly when trust fades.